And a quick show of hands, I guess. Who here, if you're not like embarrassed to admit it, identifies him or herself as a millennial? Raise your hand. Okay, cool, all right. Who here is a Gen Xer? Generation X was around, you were alive when Kurt Cobain was alive. Who here is a baby boomer? Like your coming of age was contextualized by martial law. Why is that funny? Okay, so I was born in 1993. William Strauss and Neil Howe, according to them, a millennial is defined as someone who was born, I believe, from 1982 to 2004. A Pew Research Center says that millennials are defined as those born on and past 1980. They didn't put a ceiling on it. Time magazine just kind of like gathered all of these different findings and averaged it out to millennials as being born from 1980 to 2000. That being said, based on two historians, a nonprofit institution that specializes in content analysis, and a globally influential magazine, I am apparently a millennial. I am apparently part of the generation that many people like to call lazy, self-entitled, narcissistic, etc., etc., etc. But I mean, like, so what? Who cares? That particular article from Time magazine came out in 2013. That's 2 years ago, 2 whole years ago. You know how long ago that was? That was like back when undercuts were still kind of trendy. And like, the thing about that is, over the course of those 2 years, popular culture just kind of loaded all of these different meanings and connotations onto the term, and then the load became so heavy that the word became either meaningless or just hard to take seriously. My friends don't take it seriously, neither do I, and I assume not a lot of people here take it seriously either. There's this notion that the millennial conversation, I suppose, has gone on for too long, whether you see it on think pieces on your feed or you're just like talking about it with your fellow millennial friends. But I mean, like, I'm here because I think I can bring something new to the table, maybe. I remember I was in the car with a friend that I don't get to see often. We were on our way home from a shoot, and we were driving through Marikina. He was in the driver's seat, I was in the passenger seat, and he was talking about how much he admired the urban planning that went into Marikina. How it was so different from the other more commercialized, more industrialized, high-rise type cities. He's into urban planning, he likes reading maps, that's what he's into. And so he asks me, so what are you into? And for a good 10 seconds, I'm just quiet and having this micro existential crisis, like, oh my God, what am I into? Am I into anything at all? And then he cuts through my silence and he says, or does that trouble your millennial soul? So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. What troubles my millennial soul? So my name is Jam. I was born in 1993. I'm 22 years old and I write for a living. I'm a columnist for Youngstar, I work for Rogue, I do spoken word every now and then, I sing and write lyrics for a band, and recently I got the opportunity to be head writer for a play staged by the Sandbox Collective called No Filter. And I also got to head write for the second incarnation, No Filter 2.0, both being plays about, by, and for millennials. I shared the role of head writer with a good friend of mine, poet and filmmaker Wango Galyaga. Our director was Toff Devanesha, and the three of us, we would work together prepping the text for the stage, editing, revising, stuff like that. While Wango and I were head writers, there's this misconception that we wrote everything. That's not actually true. We gathered different writers who, in retrospect, I suppose, didn't have a problem being called millennials, and we asked them to write about different issues that resonated with them in relation to their standing as being part of Generation Y, whether it be growing up with pre-cable internet, or dating anxieties, or being a millennial from the province making their way towards the highly frenetic urban jungle that is Manila. The creative process for No Filter, who has seen it, by the way? I just want to see. Okay, cool, all right. The creative process for No Filter was this strange combination of like pretending to know things and admitting that you actually didn't know things. Like sometimes we would pitch to each other these new concepts or ideas to write about, and then somebody might say, is that a millennial issue? Or maybe we should millenniify that a bit more, as if we were working within an objective criteria for what the millennial experience was. On the other hand, when we would revise or write or edit, somebody might say, yes, this part works because it exposes how elusive the definition of the millennial experience can be, as if to admit that the project was standing on shaky ground this whole time. And those were two opposing mindsets which pulled us from both sides, and while that made the process challenging and therefore fulfilling, the more I thought about it, the more I came to understand that these two mindsets were two sides of the same concern, and I think that concern is this. Are these experiences truly symptomatic of the times we live in, or are they just part and parcel of youth? Or to phrase it another way, is it this day and age, or is it just my age? And these are questions that we had to take into account because we were trying to describe the millennial condition, the millennial experience, what it means to be part of Generation Y, reacting to all the other generations that came before us. I think it's a question that lives inside of us whether we're aware of it or not. In fact, whether we are millennials or not, if you want to stretch it that far. And that concern, the more I thought about it, the more it just seemed very high stakes to me. Because let me explain it this way. If I manage to identify an experience as something symptomatic of this day and age, of the times we live in, I can say, yes, I have called it. I know the characteristics that make this point in history distinct from all the other points in history that came before it. I captured the zeitgeist, I cut off its head, I hung its head on the mantle over the fireplace. Yeah, okay, cool. But if it's just the other thing, if it's just my youth, it's as if to say, what we go through, what Generation Y goes through, is nothing special. I know it's silly, not just the notion of like worrying about it, but the idea that it's hard to tell the difference between these two things, because it's easy to pinpoint immediately one thing about the millennial experience that makes it distinct from all the other generations before it, and that is coming of age during the time of the internet. Gen Xers and baby boomers, sure, they know how to surf the web, they know how to navigate cyberspace, and I guess your grandparents are vaguely familiar with the web. But Generation Y, we spent our adolescent/formative years exposed and granted access to a technology that allows for the instant transportation and distribution of information. And all these different algorithms are designed to facilitate our internet-going experiences, and all these social media platforms that cater to different modes of expression are just popping up everywhere. And this is all happening during a turbulent age, during puberty. And that's the thing. I think it was this weird collision of hormones and the closest thing that the human race has to a super brain just colliding with each other, crashing into each other, and out of that wreckage came the millennial. The millennial. That's my personal definition for the millennial. It's basically hormones plus algorithms. But I think the internet is, understanding certain aspects of the internet allows us to understand why the millennial is the way he or she is. And by addressing these aspects, we're able to understand, better able to process the question, is it this day and age, or is it just my age? I'm not qualified, I think, to talk about atemporality or network culture or the idea of digital nativity. But if I may go by a feeling, the internet is overwhelming. The internet isn't not so much this organized superhighway of information, but a bundle of nerves with its own tight knots and loose threads that we have to swim and untangle through. Not from, but through, because we're already in it, and we can't imagine our lives without it. Can you imagine working, studying, living your social life without Wi-Fi? I certainly can't. And you might be thinking, if it's so overwhelming, why don't you just get off the grid? And that leads me to my next point. Next aspect about the internet is it's highly connective. we've heard so much about how social media allows us to connect with other people, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. And while I do think that's true in some ways, more than that, social media platforms and the internet age generally allows us to experience a sense of empathy distinct from the kind of empathy felt by those who lived most of their lives in the pre-internet age. It's so easy now finding different people in different communities who are into what you're into, whether it be Tumblr or through Tumblr or various message boards. But like more than that, this connectivity has allowed us to understand and empathize with the plights and the problems and the crises of others, whether these be personal problems or the result of certain power structures. It's this condition of connectivity. It's this exposure to these different kinds of experiences and stories that compels the millennial, I think, to be super duper politically correct, socially active in an armchair kind of way, and highly conscious of emotional turmoil and mental illness. But at the same time, yes, you want to connect, but if you're in a crowded room, whether digital or literal, you become self-conscious, and that leads to the third aspect of the internet, which I think shapes the millennial condition. The internet is highly curative, curatorial. If there are any curators, I'm in a museum, who would correct me. The internet allows us to curate ourselves. Any competent company knows that their consumers buy their products because those products or their brand represent a certain kind of image that their consumers want to project. In that same vein, the internet is just this fun pile of different parts of culture, what with all the movies and the music and the shows and all the other things like Pinterest boards that you are able to find in this patch of cyberspace. You're allowed to treat knowledge and culture like accessories, and this quality of the internet has allowed us to brand ourselves very easily. I'd like to think that Generation Y is very good at branding itself, personal branding. We've managed to utilize and exploit this need, this desire to put up a front. We do it at parties, we do it at job interviews. I'm pretty sure we've got it down to a science. But there is a drawback to that when you're so good at putting up a front. In the same way that an expression influences the thought that created it, the image that you project influences your interior life. You are compelled to become what you appear to be. And it's this misalignment of our outsides and our insides that produce this sort of dissonance and this sort of confusion. And it's especially confusing if the image that you project is carved by the same kind of disorganization that the internet, being the bundle of nerves that it is, carries. Those are a few aspects of the internet that I think shape the millennial condition. So we go back to what the issue of whether or not my experiences are symptomatic of the times we live in or just an experience of youth. And I think it's a question inside all of us, and I think it's a question that causes us anxiety whether we're aware of it or not. And on that note, I think I'd like to bring forth why I think we have this question inside of us, because I have no idea if there is an objective way for us to discern between the two experiences, to tell the difference. My primary fixation is figuring out why this question exists and why it's so bothersome. And it's because that question stands for this concern, this form of paranoia. We don't know our place in history. Not really. For No Filter 2.0, I contacted one of my favorite writers. His name is Jian Lau, and I wanted to talk to him about writing a piece about how we, as millennials, as Generation Y, are constantly accused of not having a generation-defining crisis. Our parents had martial law. This was a popular opinion at the time I pitched it. I don't know if it still is. But I think on that note, it's something that we should think about. How, for some reason, we don't have some sort of crisis or some sort of historical marker that distinguishes our generation, I suppose, from other generations other than the accusations that they lob at us. The internet is overwhelming. The internet is overwhelming, presenting us different kinds of information, at the same time not promising us a dominant narrative through which we can frame our vision for the world and for its history. The internet is highly connective, and it allows us to The internet is highly connective, and it allows us to connect with people at the same time, doesn't prescribe to us a solution for how to solve these problems, and the internet allows us to brand ourselves, but because of that, we're not given a stop. We're not given like this precaution for whether we're going real or whether we're going fake, or this line inside us is blurring inside of us, and that's when it's much easier to encounter self-doubt. I'm talking to the Gen Xers and the baby boomers right now. I'm pretty sure that you guys, if I may put forward a bold assumption, that you guys are kind of a little more aware of your place in history than us Generation Y people are. You are probably settled into a particular worldview, you know who your friends are, and you probably know who you are. Us Millennials, Generation Y, I don't think we have that just yet. We're still in that tumultuous transitional phase, going from adolescence to full-fledged adulthood, whatever full-fledged adulthood is. And we're just trying to, and it's in that transitional phase that because of that transitional phase, those three aspects of our being, processing information, relating to others, and relating to ourselves, are hella volatile and are in constant flux. And I think it's that volatility that is a product of both this day and age and our youth. Now, when I came to this conclusion, I thought, damn, that's like a really sour note to end a TED Talk on. Because like TED Talks usually end with like, you know, hope, innovation, Apple products, whatever. I did not come to this spot with definite solutions. The millennial condition is not a plight, it's not a form of oppression, it's just a thing. And I believe I haven't borne the full weight of adulthood, so I can't look at this thing with eyes that remember, but with eyes that just know. At the same time, I do think that it's necessary that in any gathering where the exchange of information is priority, there should be closure. So I'll end this talk by sharing with you a daydream, or a fantasy rather. I used to entertain this fantasy a lot. Tell me if you feel this or if you've like thought about this before. I head to bed, I go to sleep, I wake up, and I am in the body of my younger self, but possessing the brain that I have now with all the knowledge that I've learned and kept. Like I get to be 14 again, but with the brain of a 22-year-old. Have you guys felt this? I get to go through the motions of high school, I get to navigate all its complex hierarchies, and I get to be above it because I've already been through it. I get to, like, move through a throng of confused batchmates with the clear head of a young adult. I get to be ahead of the trends because I already know what's next. I get to meet different people, I get to fall in love with different people, and I get to live in such a way that by the time I'm 22 again, I'm already all above the bullcrap. Now, I don't entertain that fantasy much anymore. I think that at some point, I just started being a little more thankful for my circumstances, for all the good and bad that came with my present. And I came to acknowledge that all the anxiety and contradictions and flux and volatility that I felt were what allowed me to be unique, were what allowed me to acknowledge how human I am, and how human beings are, and how human all of this is, this platform of exchanging information because we're constantly discontent. I don't think that what is there to gain traveling back in time will outweigh what is there to lose from letting go of my present. So I'm here, Generation Y, with nothing left to say except what a time to be alive. Thank you.